Welcome to the Bruce Poinsette Show. This is the world's most dangerous infomercial. Along with my producer Ada, we bring you this bi-weekly news, commentary, and interview experience from the Numbers FM studio at the Portland Art Museum. You can catch the full show on Wednesdays at 7 p.m. on 96.7 The Numbers FM, and you can catch clips on youtube.com/Bruce Poinsette, plus exclusive bonus content by becoming a member at patreon.com/Bruce Poinsette. Now, usually we'd be recording these live, but I'm out of studio this month. That said, we've got a very special episode with you. Normally, about this time, we'd be talking about the news stories you might have missed, but we're actually going to be dedicating this week's news segment to my hometown of Lake Oswego and my alma mater, the Lake Oswego School District. So, for those who don't know, Lake Oswego School District, LOSD, is currently in let's say discussions, but they're not taking that seriously. So there's been pressure from students and community members to get SROs out of schools. What are SROs? You say they're student resource officers, also known as cops. Yes. So in other districts, for example, probably most notably Portland Public Schools, Gresham, other districts around the Portland metro area down to Salem, they have actually taken steps or actually removed SROs from their schools, which was a big ask, a big demand that came up, especially during the 2020 protests. And, a lot of institutions, a lot of school districts, including LOSD, they came out with equity statements. They made a lot of, they talked a big game, but since the students asked, because I'm also part of this group, Respond to Racism LO, and we've held multiple discussions. We're going to show some clips from one of them that happened most recently, but we've held multiple discussions on the need to remove SROs. We've talked with students, talked with parents, and I can tell you personally, I've gotten complaints from families that it's been disturbing, not just because the actions, like you can go down a YouTube rabbit hole of all of the news stories of SROs throughout the country harassing and brutalizing students, especially with cases of racial profiling. Because again, all the same problems you have with cops in the streets are the same problems you have with cops in schools, except, the students obviously have even less power than, someone who might be stopped in traffic. So, yeah, I've had parents complain to me about the actions. LO, for those who don't know, has two SROs, and I've gotten complaints about one in particular over the last few years, especially since I started, because SROs and LO1 are relatively new, but since starting with Respond to Racism, which started in 2017, year has not gone by where I haven't gotten complaints from someone about SROs. But the problem that often arises is when people take those complaints to the superintendent or they take them to the principal, they hit a roadblock because they're told, file a formal complaint. But there's a real culture of retaliation that happens in the district, whether it be, from people with inside, even outside. So I mentioned earlier that we held a discussion on SROs with Respond to Racism very recently. In fact, this past August, with input and a panel of the student panel. So as a result of that, I should also mention that Respond to Racism was a group that was co-founded by my mother, Willie Poinsette. Shout out to her. And she was recently organization Respond to Racism. They table at the farmer's market. So she actually had some random white man come up and harass her about that, and really, wasn't accepting, her responses, was trying to tell her that even though honestly he's the person he should have been talking to was me, if anything, but telling her that we owed the officers an apology, that we owe the district an apology, how dare us, and really getting in her face about before one of the students who participated in the panel who happened to be there basically just had to step back up to him and push him off. My mom is you know, it's a woman in her 70s. But I digress. Anyways, you have this whole culture around this of protecting SROs, protecting anything that has to do with police budgets, which is a conversation we've obviously had a lot when it comes to Portland. And it's just continue having these weird instances, this weird stonewalling, and knowing that honestly that the district is not, they say they're listening, but they're not on their side. They're not on the student side. I it's funny. They talked about the process, and we're going to watch a video quickly or very soon where one of the students talks about the process when they were trying to have a district-wide discussion. They had student focus groups. They also had a survey they sent out throughout the district, in the name of transparency. But how transparent was that process? How transparent was that input process? Keep in mind, we're talking about Lake Oswego School District. So the students who are going to be most negatively affected are, a minority of Black and brown students with disabilities versus majority white students. So even in that input process, how's that work? But let me stop for a minute. Let's watch a clip from the student panel where, student Sarah Al-Kiram talks about, what those student focus groups look like. And also actually Perrin Timon, also another student who participated in those focus groups, also discusses that process. So Ado, could you cue that up?
I guess I'll start. So the question was, how is the process behind the scenes? And how do we feel about the school district saying there are no complaints? Speaking from personal experience, I don't think that's true. I was at the SRO focus group with the students that was held during the support seminar and PACER time in the last few weeks of school. And we were told to express our thoughts on the SROs. Honestly, we were told that the recording wasn't going to be shared with anyone and to be using that information to tell the school district what the students think. Then watching back the school district recording or the meeting or whatever was happening, the presentation, the information was slightly skewed. Apparently, students are neutral on SROs, but I can testify as to say that there was not a single neutral thought spoken during that SRO focus group. Everything that was said was negative, and no one was in favor of SROs.
I can add on to that. I run a student group for gun violence prevention at Lake Ridge High School, and we also have spoken to the school district on SROs, and I know that my entire club is against having school resource officers in our schools, as well as I personally was on the SRO focus group that LOSD had in 2021, which lasted several months via Zoom. And as one of the 3 students there, I can tell you that students still were not a fan of SROs and wanted some solution that would not involve police in our schools.
Yeah. So heard from a couple students there. And it's funny, after we had this meeting, John Park, who works in LOSD, sent out survey results that they conducted as well from, they had almost 300 responses. So I want to, give them their credit there about, how do people feel about SROs? Now, the big one was, how satisfied are you? There's a 40.3% with no opinion. And, unsatisfied and extremely satisfied, I guess, didn't clock in with numbers. So you had another 34.5% saying they were satisfied, and even 17.7% saying they're extremely satisfied. So, no problem, right? But again, we're talking about a district of last time I remember, it was like when I was going to school, there was like, 1,200 people in my school. So, weigh those responses as you will. But also, again, a vast majority white district, white, privileged, and not going to be affected versus, when you talk about complaints I've gotten, stories I've gotten, such as a Black student, for example, who transferred for a very short time and was arrested by the SRO in front of everybody in the middle of the school because of the SRO allegedly, I guess, went on to do his own research and allegedly found like an old shoplifting warrant or something, and then used that again as a pretense to embarrass the kid by arresting him in front of the entire school. I don't know where even if that was the case where that would be acceptable, but these are the things that happen. Kids getting harassed you know, going to like SAT prep classes, all these different things that again people don't feel comfortable sending a complaint to the district because the district is clearly they want to keep this program in June. They signed another 2-year agreement, even though these discussions have been happening. We've gotten reports again of people who have tried to speak out and have been there's no other way to say it, intimidated by people from within the district behind the scenes. I'm talking about students. I just dirty dirty politics just to stop this discussion. And then we're left with these data points where again you heard the student saying there's nothing neutral, nothing positive that came out about SROs, but somehow when the actual report was made, students were neutral. I don't know how that works. And then I'll say this as well, because the district, other people, supporters of having cops in schools are gonna paint me as just some a disgruntled alumni, someone that's not giving this a fair chance. I also like to point out again, I've been with Respond to Racism near the since about 2 months since its inception, right? In that time, I've met with police officers, had discussions about this specifically, and I met, one of those meetings was with one of the current SROs, James Usher, who, for all intents and purposes, nice guy. I haven't actually gotten, I haven't gotten any complaints about him. Seems like a good guy. Also, I think the skills he has could be translated to many other fields serving people besides being a cop in a school. Like just the thought. I don't have to, again, I have nothing against him personally. Nothing against former LO Police Chief Dale Jorgensen, but there's a lot of this, a lot of these good cop myths. You've watched the news, you've probably seen those videos of SROs at the assembly dancing with Black students and all this stuff. And it's this idea of like, what are you talking about? Why is this so bad? But the reality is like, it does make certain students, the students who are already isolated and feeling unwelcome there, as having the presence of a cop in school does not make them feel safer. And it's not something that students or their families feel particularly safe really complaining about or like filing formal complaints about against the district, because that just means potential retaliation, more isolation, more intimidation. And it's just like, you can't get it's hard to get a fair shot at actually talking about this issue. And even when you do, you get the pushback. And we have another segment coming up on this show where we're going to talk about the superintendent's response. But in the meantime, we just need to, one, I want to really encourage parents and community members in the school district, especially, to support these students who are speaking out and actually listen. Don't just take the district's word at face value. Again, if they're willing to change the results of these student focus groups, they don't feel confident enough in the responses they got that were negative, and they feel that they need to change it to say that it was neutral. Who is that for? Who? It's not for the students. It's not for the student safety. Even now we're in this case where we're using school shootings as another impetus to say, well, clearly we need the SROs. But I'll remind people of an incident. I want to say it was Park Rose High School a few years ago, where a school shooting was stopped. It wasn't stopped by the cop. It was stopped by a staff member, former U of O football player, Keenan Lowe, who was a staff whose students had relationships with, who students trusted to be able to tell him when they got tipped off that one of their classmates was planning to shoot up the school. And he stopped it. So never mind, like when we talk about safety in these schools, God forbid something like that happens. If the students don't even feel safe enough to, if not all the students feel safe enough to even, talk to the SRO or talk to the person who's supposed to be responsible for this, there's just all kinds of factors that, again, don't help the students. And I know lastly, before we get off of this, the district will also say, well, we did invest a bunch of resources into more counselors. And I think that's great. I do. Actually, I would encourage more of that, and specifically more Black and brown counselors, more counselors specifically with cultural competency to deal with students who are isolated and underrepresented. But you know what would contribute to even more of that? If we save the money we're spending on cops to put more of that money into more of those resources, because it's needed.